She turned down Harvard and Yale, earned a real neuroscience PhD, played a scientist on one of the biggest shows on television, then lost one of the most iconic hosting jobs in TV history, all while raising 2 kids on her own. But none of that is what people are talking about right now. Earlier this year, she published a personal essay that stopped people mid-scroll. Not because it was scandalous, but because nobody expected someone with her background, her credentials, her entire identity built around science, to say what she said. In June of 2025, Mayim Bialik published a deeply personal essay in the Free Press, and it spread fast. She described what happened after her doctors recommended she try a low-dose GLP-1 medication, the same class of weight loss and diabetes drugs that had become one of the biggest medical conversations in the country. Given her history with Graves' disease, an autoimmune condition that affects the thyroid, her medical team felt it was worth exploring. She agreed. What followed was not what anyone expected, especially not her. She wrote about experiencing one of the worst physical reactions of her life: severe digestive distress, painful cramping, bloating, and an inability to keep down even small sips of water. Days where she was essentially unable to function. For someone who had spent years studying the human body at an academic level, the experience hit differently. It wasn't just physically brutal. It shook something in her. But here's what made the essay actually travel. She wasn't writing it to scare people off the medication. She was careful to say that GLP-1 drugs have genuinely helped a lot of people. What she was pointing to was a gap. A silence around the cases where things go wrong. The conversation had become so dominated by success stories that people who had adverse reactions felt invisible. And she clearly felt like one of them. For her audience, it landed hard. Because this wasn't some celebrity complaining about a trend. This was a neuroscientist saying, the system doesn't always make room for the outliers. And I was one. To understand why that essay hit the way it did, you have to go back further. Because Mayim Bialik was never a typical Hollywood story. She first appeared on national television around age 12, and by her teens she was starring in her own show. Blossom ran from 1991 to 1995 and made her a recognizable face across America. But while other child stars were leaning into the fame, the magazine covers, the party circuit, Mayim was doing something different. People on set would find her between takes with her nose in actual academic material. She was curious in a way that didn't fit the mold. And then something happened that almost nobody in her position would have done. She received acceptance letters from both Harvard and Yale. The kind of news most families celebrate for months. She turned them both down. Not because she wasn't serious about school, but because she wanted to stay in California, stay close to her family, and pursue both science and acting at the same time. She enrolled at UCLA instead. She wasn't choosing fame over education, or education over family. She was refusing to let anyone else define what her path had to look like. At UCLA, she didn't coast on her celebrity or treat the degree as a side project. In 2007, she completed her PhD in neuroscience. Her dissertation focused on hypothalamic activity in people with Prader-Willi syndrome, a complex genetic condition. This was serious, peer-reviewed, years in the lab academic work. And then, instead of going into research full-time, she walked back onto a television set. But here's where things start to get complicated. When Mayim joined The Big Bang Theory in 2010 as Amy Farrah Fowler, there was an obvious irony in the casting, a real neuroscientist playing a neuroscientist on TV. The show leaned into it, and audiences loved it. She was nominated for 4 Emmy Awards for the role. For a stretch of years, she was one of the most recognizable women on American television. But visibility in Hollywood is a double-edged thing, and the bigger her platform got, the more scrutiny followed every opinion she shared publicly. In 2012, she published a parenting book called Beyond the Sling, outlining her approach to attachment parenting, extended breastfeeding, co-sleeping, baby wearing. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Supporters saw it as thoughtful and research-grounded. Critics called it extreme and potentially harmful. The debate got loud and personal. And it was the beginning of a pattern. Any time she spoke with conviction about something, a portion of the public would treat her expertise as arrogance. Then her marriage ended. She and Michael Stone had been together for nearly a decade. Their divorce in 2013 became public news at the height of her visibility. She was navigating it privately while filming, doing press, and raising 2 sons largely on her own. And slowly, an image was calcifying in the public mind. Intense, opinionated, difficult. It wasn't entirely fair, but it was sticking. And what happened next would make it much worse. 2017 is the year that genuinely changed the arc of her public life. When the Harvey Weinstein story broke and the Me Too movement swept through Hollywood, Mayim wrote about her own experience navigating the industry. Her op-ed ran in the New York Times. Her intention seemed sincere. She wrote about growing up as a girl who didn't fit the conventional beauty mold, about being largely overlooked by powerful men who preyed on young women, and about the personal choices she had made that she believed had kept her off that radar. The response was swift and severe. Readers and commentators across social media argued that her framing implied women who dressed differently, or moved in high-profile spaces, were somehow more responsible for what happened to them. The term used over and over was victim blaming. She apologized. She clarified. She acknowledged that her words had caused real pain to people she had genuinely wanted to support. But the damage was lasting. Articles from that period still surface whenever her name comes up. She had spent her whole life building credibility through education and careful thinking. And in one essay, written quickly, in the middle of one of the most emotionally charged cultural moments of the decade, that credibility took a hit it wouldn't fully recover from. What came next, though, nobody could have predicted. By the time Jeopardy came calling in 2021, Mayim was in the middle of a complicated public rehabilitation. Her podcast, Bialik's Breakdown, had built a real audience. She was opening up about mental health, therapy, and the science of emotional resilience. Things felt like they were shifting. Then the Jeopardy announcement happened. It was revealed that Ken Jennings and Mayim would share hosting duties, Jennings on the syndicated version, Mayim on primetime specials and spin-offs. The reaction from longtime fans was not warm. Online petitions circulated. Comment sections filled up. Every episode she hosted was dissected. Her delivery, her timing, what she wore. Comparisons to Jennings were constant and rarely flattering. Part of the criticism was probably fair. Live game show hosting is a specific skill, and she was learning in public. But a significant portion of the hostility felt like it was less about her performance and more about her history. The op-ed. The parenting controversy. The perception of her as someone who always had to be the smartest person in the room. She hosted through 2022 and into 2023. Then the Writers Guild of America went on strike. When the WGA strike began in May of 2023, Mayim made the decision to stop hosting in solidarity with the writers. It was a principled stand. It also effectively handed her opponents a reason to move on. By the end of 2023, Sony confirmed that her hosting contract would not be renewed. Ken Jennings would take over as sole permanent host. She lost the job. Publicly. In a way that felt, to a lot of people watching, like a verdict on her entire second chapter in television. But what happened next? That's the part that changes everything. She didn't rush to replace it. She had already launched Bialik's Breakdown in early 2021, and rather than treating it as a placeholder while she waited for the next TV opportunity, she leaned in. The podcast became something with its own identity. Conversations with psychologists, researchers, and people navigating mental health challenges, all filtered through her neuroscience background. It wasn't a celebrity interview show. It had a specific intellectual texture to it, and it attracted a specific kind of listener. She also started talking about her own struggles in a way she hadn't before. Depression. The anxiety of being a single parent. The long-term emotional residue of the op-ed fallout. Those were the episodes that spread. People weren't just following her because of the Big Bang Theory anymore. They were following her because she was saying out loud the things a lot of people felt but hadn't heard articulated that clearly. She returned repeatedly to the relationship between chronic stress and physical health, explaining how prolonged emotional pressure doesn't just affect mood. It rewires how the body responds to everything from sleep to digestion to immune function. For her listeners, this wasn't abstract science. It was a framework for understanding their own lives. In 2022, she stepped behind the camera for the first time as director on the film As They Made Us, a quiet family drama about an adult daughter trying to hold her fractured family together while processing grief and estrangement. It was personal in ways that were obvious to anyone paying attention. Critics noted the honesty of the storytelling. It didn't clean things up at the end. The film didn't become a blockbuster, but it confirmed something her supporters had been saying for a while. She had creative instincts that went beyond performing other people's words. What also became clear was that she was deliberately building something decentralized, a career that didn't live or die on one network's decision, one producer's approval, or one show's ratings. The podcast was hers. The film was hers. The essays were hers. After years of having her livelihood tied to other people's platforms, that independence wasn't incidental. It was the whole point. And then came the GLP-1 essay, which, in retrospect, fits perfectly into the through line. Here's the thing about her story that tends to get lost in the individual controversies. Every single setback she has experienced has come directly from the same source as her credibility. Her willingness to say exactly what she thinks, in exactly the way she thinks it, without softening it for the room. The parenting book, that was her genuine philosophy, not a calculated brand play. The New York Times essay, she wrote it because she believed she had something valuable to contribute. The decision to walk away from Jeopardy during the strike, she has said she couldn't in good conscience cross that line, regardless of the career cost. These decisions have cost her real money, real opportunities, real reputation. But they have also built something that most celebrities who play it safe never accumulate, a genuinely loyal audience that trusts her. Not because she is always right, but because she is consistently honest about her thinking. When she gets something wrong, she says so. When something in her own life contradicts the image, she puts it on the table. The GLP-1 essay is a perfect example. She is a scientist who, by her own account, trusted a medical intervention that made her severely ill. She could have kept that private. Instead, she wrote about it publicly and specifically, not to generate sympathy or go viral, but because she thought the gap in the conversation was worth filling. And the response confirmed something important. People are hungry for that kind of honesty, especially from someone with actual scientific literacy who isn't trying to sell them anything. There is also something worth noting about the timing of all of this. She didn't start over in her 20s with nothing to lose. She rebuilt in her 40s, with a public record of controversies that anyone could pull up in 30 seconds. That is a different kind of courage. Restarting when you are young and unknown is a risk. Restarting when the whole internet remembers your worst moments is something else entirely. At 49, she is not trying to be Amy Farrah Fowler. She is not trying to be the next Alex Trebek. She is writing essays that make people stop scrolling. She is directing films about families that don't heal neatly. She is hosting conversations about the parts of mental health that television won't touch. It took her roughly 3 decades, a divorce, a public scandal, a failed high-profile job, and a medical ordeal to get here. But she got here. And now that you can see it, you can't unsee it.